Elena's hands were shaking before the doors even opened. She stood at the edge of the great hall, pressed between two guards who would not meet her eyes, and she could hear her own heartbeat louder than the drums outside. Tonight, Alpha Cade of the Ashwood Pack would choose his mate. Everyone already knew the answer, everyone but her heart, which refused to stop hoping for something it had no right to hope for. "Stand straight," her mother whispered, adjusting the sash across Elena's shoulder. "Let your sister shine. This is her night." Elena nodded, because nodding was easier than speaking. Across the hall, Celine stood glowing in candlelight, her golden hair braided with silver thread, her smile already practiced and perfect. Celine had always known how to shine. Elena had spent her whole life learning how to disappear. The doors opened. A wave of sound rushed in, drums and low voices and the shuffle of hundreds of feet, and Elena felt herself pulled forward by the current of the crowd. The hall was massive, lit by torches that threw long shadows against stone walls carved with wolf symbols older than the pack itself. At the far end, on a raised platform, stood Alpha Cade. He was taller than she expected, broader too, with dark hair pushed back from a face that looked carved rather than born. His eyes were the color of deep water, and when they swept across the crowd, everyone in their path seemed to hold their breath. Elena had heard stories about him, the pack that feared no enemy, the Alpha who had never lost a fight, never broken a promise, never shown mercy to those who threatened his people. She had imagined him cold. Standing there now, she realized cold did not begin to describe him. Her father guided both daughters toward the platform, one hand on each of their backs. Elena felt Celine's excitement radiating like heat from a fire. She felt her own fear radiating just as strongly, though she prayed no one could sense it. "Twin daughters of the Hartwell line," the pack elder announced, his voice carrying across the hall. "Celine and Elena, born of the same night, raised under the same moon." Cade's gaze moved between them. Elena forced herself to breathe. She told herself it did not matter which one he chose. She told herself she did not care. She was lying, and she knew it. The elder continued, listing bloodlines and alliances, speaking of treaties between the Hartwell and Ashwood packs that had been decades in the making. None of it mattered to Elena. All that mattered was the moment approaching, the moment when Cade would step forward and place his hand on the shoulder of the woman he intended to claim, sealing a bond that would last a lifetime. Celine straightened her spine, chin lifted, ready. Cade stepped down from the platform. The hall went utterly silent. He walked toward them slowly, each footstep echoing off stone, and Elena felt her pulse pound in her ears. She watched his eyes, searching for some sign, some flicker of intention. He looked at Celine for a long moment, then, for the briefest second, his gaze slid to Elena. It was nothing. A glance. A mistake, probably. An accident of geometry since the sisters stood so close together. She told herself that even as something in her chest twisted painfully. He stopped in front of Celine. "Celine of the Hartwell line," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying easily through the silent hall. "I choose you." The words landed like a physical blow, though Elena had known, had always known, this was how it would end. Celine's face broke into a radiant smile, and the hall erupted into applause and cheering, drums picking up their rhythm again, torches seeming to burn brighter. Elena stood frozen, smiling because she had no other choice, clapping because her hands needed something to do besides shake. Beside her, Celine turned, practically glowing, and reached for Cade's offered hand. "This is an alliance built on strength," the elder called out over the noise. "Two great packs, joined as one." Elena stepped back, letting the crowd swallow her, needing distance from the platform, from the cheering, from the sight of her sister's hand in Cade's. She made her way toward the edge of the hall, toward the cool night air beyond the open doors, and she did not look back. Outside, the moon hung low and heavy, silver light spilling across the courtyard. Elena breathed deeply, trying to steady herself, trying to remind herself that this outcome had never been in question. Celine was the elder daughter by 11 minutes, the stronger wolf, by every measure the pack valued, the one who had trained for leadership since childhood, while Elena had been quietly, gently, pushed toward the background. She had accepted her place long ago. She told herself that now, standing alone under the moon while celebration roared behind her, she had accepted it. So why did it hurt like this? "You left before the toast." a voice said behind her. Elena turned, startled, to find one of the Ashwood warriors standing a respectful distance away. He was younger than Cade, with sandy hair and an easy, careful expression, the kind of face that seemed built for patience. "I needed air," Elena said. "Understandable." He studied her for a moment, longer than felt comfortable. "You are the other twin." "Elena," she said her own name like an apology. "Rowan," he offered. "I serve under Alpha Cade." He paused, glancing back toward the hall, where light and noise spilled out into the dark. "You do not look like someone celebrating a great alliance." "I am happy for my sister," Elena said, and the words felt hollow, even as she spoke them. Rowan did not push further, though something in his expression suggested he did not entirely believe her. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the moon, listening to distant laughter, until finally he spoke again. "The ceremony continues until dawn. Your family will expect you back inside eventually." Elena nodded, though she made no move to return. She was not ready to watch Celine glow in Cade's presence for another several hours. She was not ready to smile through the rest of the celebration, to hear congratulations meant for her sister, to feel invisible in a room built around her family's triumph. "I will go back soon," she said, mostly to make him leave. Rowan studied her a moment longer, then nodded and returned to the hall, leaving her alone with the moon and the quiet and the slow, aching realization that her life would now be permanently tied to this alliance, this pack, this man who had chosen her sister without a second thought. She did not know, standing there in the dark, that everything was about to change. She did not know that somewhere inside that torchlit hall, something had shifted the moment Cade's eyes had passed over her, something neither of them yet understood, something that would upend every plan made that night. All she knew, standing alone, under the cold silver moon, was that she felt smaller than she ever had in her life, and that tomorrow would bring nothing but more of the same. She was wrong about that too. Elena eventually returned to the hall, slipping quietly along the edges of the crowd, avoiding her mother's searching eyes and her father's proud smile, as he accepted congratulations from pack elders. Celine stood at the center of it all, Cade beside her, both of them the picture of a perfect match. Elena watched from a distance, feeling the familiar ache of being the twin who did not matter, the spare rather than the heir. She found a quiet corner near the tall windows and stayed there for the remainder of the ceremony, watching, waiting, counting the hours until she could finally retreat to her chambers and let the exhaustion of pretending catch up with her. When at last the celebration began to wind down, guests trickling out into the night, servants clearing away the remains of the feast, Elena slipped away unnoticed. She walked the long corridor toward her room, her footsteps echoing on stone, and she did not look back at the hall where her sister still stood glowing beside the Alpha King. In her room, she removed the ceremonial sash and set it aside, staring at her reflection in the dim mirror. She looked tired. She looked, she thought, exactly like a woman who had spent her whole life waiting for something that would never come. She climbed into bed without bothering to change fully, pulling the blankets up around her shoulders, letting her eyes close against the ache building behind them. Somewhere in the castle, celebration continued in muted echoes, laughter and music drifting faintly through stone walls. Elena ignored it all, exhaustion finally pulling her under. She did not dream, or if she did not remember it. Sleep came heavy and complete, the kind that follows a day of carrying more emotion than a person can hold. She woke to the sound of urgent knocking. For a moment, disoriented, she simply lay still, blinking at the gray light of early morning filtering through her window. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, followed by her mother's voice, tight with something Elena could not immediately identify. "Elena, Elena, wake up. You need to come now." Something in her mother's tone sent a jolt of alertness through her exhausted body. She sat up quickly, pulling a robe around her shoulders, and crossed to the door. Her mother stood in the hallway, face pale, eyes wide with an expression Elena had never seen on her before. Not anger, not sadness. Shock. "What happened?" Elena asked, fear rising in her chest. Her mother opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally managed to speak. "It is Alpha Cade," she said. "He has made an announcement." Elena's stomach dropped. What kind of announcement? Her mother's eyes searched her face, as though trying to find an answer there, as though Elena herself might somehow already understand what was happening. He says, her mother said slowly, carefully, that the bond he made last night was wrong, that his wolf recognized someone else entirely, and he intends to correct it immediately. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. Correct it how? Her mother reached out and took her hands, gripping them tightly, and when she spoke again, her voice trembled with something between disbelief and fear. He is calling for you, Elena. He says it is you he means to claim. For a long moment, Elena could not process the words at all. They seemed to hang in the air, foreign and impossible, refusing to settle into any meaning she could understand. Her, not Celine. Cade, the alpha who had chosen her sister just hours before in front of the entire pack, now claiming that the choice had been a mistake. That cannot be right, Elena finally managed. He is waiting in the courtyard, her mother said. The whole pack is gathering. You must come now, before this becomes something none of us can control. Elena's mind raced through possibilities, each one stranger than the last. A cruel joke. A political maneuver she did not understand. Some kind of test. None of it made sense, and yet her mother's face told her this was real, that something extraordinary and unexplainable had happened during the night. Something that was about to upend everything Elena believed about her place in this world. She dressed quickly, hands still trembling, her mind spinning through the implications of what she had just heard. Whatever waited for her in that courtyard, she understood already that her life had changed in ways she could not yet measure, and there was no undoing whatever had already been set into motion. She stepped out into the hallway, following her mother toward the courtyard, toward Cade, toward an answer she was not at all certain she was ready to hear. The morning air was sharp and cold against her skin as she walked beside her mother through the corridors of the keep. Servants pressed themselves against the walls as they passed, eyes lowered, and Elena caught fragments of whispered conversation, none of which she could fully make sense of. Something about a howl in the night, something about the alpha waking before dawn and refusing to speak to anyone until Elena stood before him. She reached the courtyard to find it already filled with people. Pack members stood in loose clusters, murmuring among themselves, and Elena felt dozens of eyes turned toward her as she stepped through the crowd. She searched for Celine and found her near the front, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Cade stood at the center of it all, dressed simply, his expression unreadable. When his eyes found Elena's, something shifted in his features, something Elena could not name, but felt in her chest like a physical pull. Elena, he said, and his voice, though quiet, carried easily across the silent courtyard. Come forward. She hesitated only a moment before her feet carried her toward him, the crowd parting to let her through. She stopped a few feet away, close enough now to see the certainty in his eyes, an intensity that made her pulse quicken, despite everything telling her this made no sense at all. I owe you an explanation, Cade said, loud enough for the gathered pack to hear. Last night, I made a claim I believed to be correct, but a bond between mates cannot be chosen by title or by treaty. It is recognized, not decided. And mine was wrong. Celine made a small, strangled sound of protest, but Cade did not look away from Elena. When I stood before you both last night, he continued, something in me recognized Elena. I ignored it, because it did not match what I expected, what everyone expected. I have spent the night trying to convince myself I was mistaken. I was not. The courtyard remained utterly silent, every person present holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Elena stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to fully believe the words being spoken about her, to her, in front of everyone who had watched her fade into the background her entire life. I understand. This changes everything, Cade said, his voice softening slightly, meant now only for her. I understand you may not want this, but I could not let another day pass pretending otherwise. Elena opened her mouth, though she had no idea what words might come out. Before she could speak, Celine stepped forward, her composure finally breaking. This is madness, Celine said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning air. You cannot simply change your mind because of some feeling. There are treaties. There are promises made. There are, Cade agreed, turning to face her directly. And I will honor the alliance between our packs, in every way that matters. But I will not build a life on a bond that is not real, and mine was never with you." The words landed hard, and Elena watched her sister's face shift through disbelief, humiliation, and finally something colder, something that made Elena's stomach tighten with unease. Whatever came next, she understood already that this moment had fractured something in her family that would not easily be repaired. Cade turned back to Elena, and the crowd around them seemed to fade into the background entirely. "I know this is not what you expected," he said quietly. "I am not asking you to answer today. I am only asking you to let me prove that this is real." Elena looked into his eyes, searching for deception, and finding none, only a steady, quiet certainty that unsettled her more than any lie could have. Whatever had happened during the night, whatever had shifted inside him, she understood that her life had just changed completely, and there was no path back to the quiet, invisible existence she had known before. Celine did not wait for the courtyard to empty before she turned and walked away, her spine straight, her steps sharp against the stone. Elena watched her go, torn between the urge to follow her sister and the strange, magnetic pull keeping her rooted where she stood, close to Cade, close to a man who had just upended her entire world with a handful of sentences. "You should go to her," Cade said quietly, following her gaze. Elena blinked, surprised by the suggestion. "You would allow that? I am not holding you here," he said. "I told you, I am not asking for an answer today. Go to your sister. She needs you more than I do right now." Elena nodded and turned, pushing through the thinning crowd, murmurs following her every step. She found Celine near the stables, arms wrapped around herself, staring blankly at nothing. "Celine," Elena said softly, approaching carefully. "Do not," Celine said, her voice tight. "Do not pretend you did not want this." "I did not want this," Elena said, and meant it. "I did not ask for any of it." Celine turned, eyes bright with unshed tears, and something harder beneath them. "You always say that. You always pretend you want nothing, and somehow you end up with everything anyway." The accusation stung, unfair as it felt. "I have never had anything, Celine. I have spent my whole life standing behind you. And now you get to stand in front of me," Celine snapped. "In front of the entire pack, humiliating me before every family that matters." "I did not do this to humiliate you," Elena said, her own voice rising now. "I did not do this at all. He decided this on his own, without asking either of us what we wanted." Celine studied her for a long moment, something calculating flickering behind the hurt in her eyes. "Then refuse him," she said finally. "If you truly did not want this, refuse him, and let things return to how they were meant to be." Elena hesitated, and that hesitation seemed to answer a question Celine had not directly asked. Celine's expression hardened further, and she stepped back, putting distance between them. "I see," Celine said quietly. "You want this too." "I do not know what I want," Elena admitted. "This happened this morning. I have had no time to understand any of it." "Take your time then," Celine said, turning away. "I am sure the Alpha King will wait patiently while you decide whether to steal what was promised to me." She walked away before Elena could respond, leaving her standing alone near the stables, the morning sun rising higher, the ache in her chest deepening with every step her sister took away from her. Elena remained there for a long while, trying to gather her thoughts, trying to make sense of a day that had begun in confusion, and was quickly spiraling into something far more complicated. She thought of her parents, of the alliance between their packs, of the years Celine had spent training and preparing for exactly this role, only to have it taken from her overnight, by forces neither of them controlled. She thought too of Cade, of the certainty in his eyes when he had spoken to her, of the strange, unfamiliar warmth that had spread through her chest at the sound of her name in his voice. None of it made sense. All of it felt impossibly significant. She eventually made her way back toward the keep, needing solitude, needing space to think without her mother's anxious hovering, or her father's careful diplomacy, or Celine's simmering resentment pressing in on her from every side. She found her way to a quiet garden at the edge of the grounds, a place she had discovered years ago as a child, when she had first learned that disappearing was often easier than being seen. She sat on a stone bench beneath a wide oak tree, and allowed herself, finally, a moment to simply breathe. "I thought I might find you here," a voice said. Elena looked up to find Rowan approaching, the same warrior she had spoken with the night before. He held 2 cups, offering one to her as he sat down on the opposite end of the bench. "How did you know where to look?" she asked, accepting the cup gratefully. "I did not," Rowan admitted. "I have been walking these grounds looking for anywhere quiet enough to think clearly. This seemed like a good guess." Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. "It is a good guess." They sat in silence for a while, the warm drink easing some of the tension in her shoulders. Finally, Rowan spoke again, his voice careful. "You do not believe him," he said. It was not quite a question. "I do not know what to believe," Elena admitted. "This is not something that happens. Mates are not simply reassigned overnight because someone changed his mind." "They are not reassigned," Rowan said. "A true bond does not form by choice. It forms on its own, whether we want it to or not. Alphas have been known to resist recognizing a mate, for reasons of politics or pride. But resisting does not make the bond disappear. It only delays it." "You believe him then," Elena said. "I have served Cade for many years," Rowan said. "I have never known him to act rashly, and I have never known him to lie, especially not in front of the entire pack, especially not about something that risks the very alliance he claims to value." He paused. "Whatever happened last night, whatever shifted in him, I do not believe it was a decision made lightly." Elena considered this, but turning the words over carefully. She wanted to dismiss them, wanted to convince herself that this was some elaborate mistake that would resolve itself given enough time. But some small, stubborn part of her, the part that had felt something shift in her own chest the moment Cade's eyes had first found hers, refused to let the doubt settle completely. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "If this bond is real, what happens to my sister? What happens to the alliance she was meant to secure?" "That will be for the elders and the Alpha to work out," Rowan said. "But I imagine the treaty can hold regardless of which sister stands beside him. The alliance was never truly about which twin wore the mark. It was about joining our packs together." Elena nodded slowly, though comfort remained distant. She thought of Celine's face, the hurt and fury barely contained beneath her composed exterior, and she understood that whatever happened next, the damage between them had already been done. Whether she accepted this bond or refused it entirely, her relationship with her sister would never be quite the same again. "Thank you," she said finally, looking up at Rowan, "for speaking honestly with me." "You deserve honesty," Rowan said, rising from the bench. "More than most people in this castle seem willing to offer you." He nodded once and began to walk away, leaving her alone again with her thoughts and the slowly warming morning sun. Elena remained in the garden long after he had gone, watching sunlight shift through the leaves above her, turning the strange, impossible morning over and over in her mind. She did not know what she believed yet. She did not know what she wanted. But she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she could not simply refuse Cade without first understanding what had truly happened between them, without giving herself the chance to discover whether what he claimed to feel was real. Whatever came next, she would not make that decision out of fear, or guilt, or a lifetime of believing herself unworthy of being chosen. For the first time in her life, she intended to choose for herself. By midday, word of the morning's events had spread through every corner of the castle and beyond, carried by servants and warriors alike, growing more exaggerated with each retelling. Elena heard fragments of the rumors as she made her way back toward her family's chambers, whispered conversations that fell silent whenever she passed. Some claimed Cade had been struck by a vision from the moon spirits themselves. Others whispered that Elena had used some hidden magic to steal her sister's rightful place. None of it was true, but Elena understood that truth rarely mattered once a story began to spread on its own. Her father was waiting when she arrived, standing near the window of the family's private sitting room, his expression carefully neutral in the way that only years of diplomatic training could produce. Her mother sat nearby, hands folded tightly in her lap, and Elena could see the toll the morning had already taken on both of them. "Sit," her father said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. Elena obeyed, bracing herself for whatever conversation was about to follow. "I will not pretend this is not complicated," her father began. "The alliance with Ashwood was built on the expectation that Celine would stand beside Alpha Cade. Her training, her preparation, all of it was built around that role." "I understand," Elena said quietly. "Do you?" her father asked, not unkindly, but with a weight that made Elena's chest tighten. This is not simply a matter of feelings, Elena. This affects trade agreements, territorial boundaries, defense arrangements between two of the strongest packs in the region. If this bond is real, it changes who leads beside the Alpha, who negotiates on behalf of our family, who carries the weight of this alliance for the rest of her life. I did not ask for any of this, Elena said, echoing the same words she had given Celine hours earlier. I know, her mother said gently, speaking for the first time. No one is accusing you of scheming for this outcome, Elena, but now that it has happened, you must understand the responsibility that comes with it. Elena nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of what her mother was saying. She had spent her entire life believing herself unsuited for exactly this kind of responsibility, content to remain in the background while Celine carried the family's expectations. Now, seemingly overnight, those expectations had shifted onto her shoulders instead, whether she felt ready for them or not. What do you want me to do? Elena asked finally. Her father considered the question for a long moment before answering. I want you to be certain, he said. Whatever you decide, decide it because it is true, not because you feel obligated to accept it, and not because you feel obligated to refuse it out of guilt toward your sister. This decision will shape the rest of your life, and likely the future of both our packs. Choose carefully. Elena left the conversation, with her father's words echoing in her mind, heavier now than they had been that morning. She understood, more clearly than before, that whatever choice she made would ripple outward far beyond her own life, touching her family, her pack, and the alliance that had brought Cade and Celine together in the first place. She spent the remainder of the afternoon wandering the castle grounds alone, trying to sort through the tangled mess of emotion and obligation, pulling her in every direction. She thought of Celine's fury, of her father's careful warning, of Rowan's quiet confidence in Cade's honesty, and beneath all of it, she thought of the strange warmth that had spread through her chest the moment Cade had spoken her name in front of the entire pack. She did not seek him out that day. She was not ready for that conversation yet, not while her thoughts remained so tangled, not while the wound between herself and Celine remained so fresh. But as the sun began to set and the sky above the castle turned brilliant shades of orange and violet, Elena found herself standing at her window, looking out toward the training grounds where she could just make out Cade's figure among his warriors, moving through drills with the same quiet intensity he had shown that morning. She did not know yet what she believed. She did not know yet what she wanted, but she understood, watching him from a distance, that ignoring this would not make it disappear. Whatever had happened between them, whatever strange recognition had passed through him the night before, it had already changed the course of her life beyond any possibility of returning to what came before. Tomorrow, she decided, she would seek answers of her own. Elena found Cade the following morning, near the edge of the training grounds, standing apart from his warriors, watching the sunrise paint the distant hills gold. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say a dozen times during the sleepless hours of the night, yet standing before him now, every carefully prepared word deserted her. You came, he said, turning to face her, something like relief flickering briefly across his features, before settling back into careful composure. I have questions, Elena said, forcing steadiness into her voice. And I want honest answers, not comfort, not diplomacy. Ask them, Cade said simply. Elena studied him for a moment, gathering her courage. How do you know this is real? How do you know you are not simply mistaken, confused by exhaustion or the pressure of the ceremony? I have led this pack for 6 years, Cade said. I have felt exhaustion. I have felt pressure. I have never, in all that time, felt what moved through me the moment I first looked at you. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. When I stood before you and your sister, my wolf reacted the way stories describe a mate bond reacting, a pull I could not ignore, no matter how firmly I told myself the choice had already been made. But you chose Celine, Elena said. You said her name, you claimed her, in front of everyone. I did, Cade admitted, something like shame crossing his expression. I convinced myself the feeling was nothing more than surprise, or curiosity, or the strangeness of standing before twins for the first time. I told myself that duty mattered more than instinct, that the alliance required a clear, uncomplicated choice, and I made the choice that seemed easiest to explain to the pack. And now? Elena pressed. Now I understand that ignoring the bond nearly cost me the truth entirely, Cade said. I could not sleep last night, could not stop thinking of the mistake I had made. By dawn, I understood I could not continue pretending, regardless of how difficult the correction would be. Elena crossed her arms, trying to hold on to her skepticism even as his words settled uncomfortably close to sincerity. This is convenient, she said. A public announcement, a dramatic reversal. Everyone forced to accept whatever you decide, because you are the alpha, and your word cannot easily be questioned. Something flickered in Cade's eyes, not anger, but a kind of patient understanding. You believe I am using this to control the situation, he said. I believe I do not know you well enough to determine what you are doing, Elena said honestly. I only know that yesterday you claimed my sister, and today you claim me, and I am supposed to simply trust that the second choice is the true one. Cade was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully before responding. I understand your doubt, he said finally. I would doubt it myself, in your position. I am not asking you to accept this blindly. I am asking for the chance to prove it, over time, through actions rather than words alone. And if I refuse that chance, Elena asked, then I will honor your decision, Cade said simply. I will not force a bond onto someone unwilling to explore it, regardless of what my wolf demands. But I hope you will not refuse before giving yourself the chance to know the truth for certain. Elena studied him carefully, searching his expression for any hint of deception, any flicker of calculation behind his steady gaze. She found none, though she reminded herself that skilled leaders were often skilled at hiding exactly such things. I need time, she said finally. You may have as much time as you need, Cade said. I will not pressure you, and I will not pretend this is simple. But I ask one thing in return. What is that? Do not decide based on fear of your sister's anger, or your family's expectations, or a lifetime of believing yourself unworthy of being chosen, Cade said, his voice quiet but firm. Decide based on what you feel, and nothing else. The words struck deeper than Elena expected, echoing uncomfortably close to thoughts she had not spoken aloud to anyone. She wondered, briefly, how he had guessed at insecurities she had spent years carefully hiding from everyone around her. How did you know that? She asked quietly. I did not know, Cade admitted. I guessed, based on the way you carried yourself last night, the way you seemed to shrink whenever attention turned toward you. I recognized something familiar in it. You do not seem like someone who understands what it feels like to be overlooked, Elena said, unable to keep a trace of bitterness from her voice. I was not always the alpha you see standing before you now, Cade said. My older brother was meant to lead this pack. I spent years believing myself secondary, useful only for the roles no one else wanted. Circumstances changed that, but the memory of feeling unwanted does not simply disappear once circumstances improve. Elena had not expected this response, had not expected any vulnerability at all from a man whose reputation suggested nothing but strength and certainty. Something in his admission eased, slightly, the tight knot of suspicion she had carried since the previous morning. I am not asking you to trust me completely, not yet, Cade continued. I am only asking you to remain open to the possibility that this is real, and to allow me the chance to show you, through my actions rather than empty words, that this bond is worth exploring. Elena considered his request carefully, weighing it against everything she had felt over the past day, the confusion, the doubt, the strange, undeniable pull she had felt standing before him even now. She was not ready to fully believe in something so sudden, so disruptive to everything she had known, but she found herself unwilling to dismiss it entirely either. I will not make any promises, she said finally, but I am willing to allow time to answer the questions I cannot answer myself. Something like relief passed across Cade's features, quickly smoothed back into careful composure. That is all I ask, he said. They stood together for a while longer in silence, watching the sun continue its slow climb above the distant hills, neither quite ready to end the conversation, neither quite certain what should come next. Elena found herself studying him from the corner of her eye, searching for the calculating manipulator her doubts insisted he must be, and finding instead only quiet patience, a willingness to wait for her to decide in her own time. It unsettled her more than outright deception would have. Deception she could have dismissed easily, could have used to justify walking away without a second thought. This patient sincerity left her without such easy answers, forcing her instead to confront the possibility that everything he claimed might genuinely be true. Eventually, Elena excused herself, needing space to process the conversation, needing distance from the strange, magnetic pull she felt whenever she stood too close to him for too long. As she walked back toward the keep, she became aware of eyes watching her from a distance, and she turned to find Celine standing at an upper window, watching the exchange below with an expression Elena could not fully read. Whatever had passed between them, Elena understood that her sister had witnessed enough to draw her own conclusions that would likely deepen the rift already forming between them. She continued walking, her mind still tangled with questions she had no clear answers to yet, carrying with her the uncomfortable, undeniable weight of Cade's words, the possibility that everything he claimed might genuinely be true, and the growing certainty that her life had already changed, far beyond her ability to simply refuse it and return to how things had been before. That evening, Elena found herself unable to settle into any of her usual routines. She tried to read, but the words blurred together meaninglessly on the page. She tried to sleep early, but her mind kept circling back to the conversation at the training grounds, to the steady certainty in Cade's voice, to the vulnerability he had shown when speaking of his own childhood. She eventually gave up trying to distract herself, and made her way instead toward the small library, tucked into the eastern wing of the keep, hoping to find some record, some old text that might explain the nature of mate bonds more clearly than rumor and speculation could offer. The library was quiet at this hour, lit only by a few scattered candles, and Elena moved carefully between the shelves, searching for anything relevant. She found an old volume near the back, its leather cover worn soft with age, containing accounts from previous generations of alphas and their mates. She settled into a chair near the window and began to read, absorbing stories of bonds recognized instantly, bonds resisted for years before finally being accepted, bonds that had shaped the fates of entire packs across generations. One passage in particular caught her attention, describing a bond between an alpha and a woman he had initially overlooked in favor of her more prominent sister, much like her own situation. The account described the alpha's growing unease in the days following his initial choice, an unease that had eventually driven him to reverse his decision entirely, much as Cade had done. Elena read the passage twice, then a third time, feeling something in her chest loosen slightly. She was not the first woman to find herself in this position. Whatever was happening to her now had happened before, recognized and recorded by generations that came before her own. She closed the book eventually, her mind calmer than it had been in days, though the questions had not entirely disappeared. She understood now, more clearly than before, that what Cade described was not without precedent, that mate bonds truly could shift and correct themselves in ways that defied simple explanation or convenient timing. It did not mean she trusted him completely. It did not mean her doubts had vanished entirely, but it meant she was willing, at least, to continue observing, to continue allowing him the chance he had asked for, to prove through his actions whether his claim was truth or convenient fiction. As she made her way back toward her chambers, candle in hand, she passed by Celine's door and paused, hearing quiet voices from within. She recognized her sister's voice immediately, tense and low, though the words themselves were muffled through the heavy wood. A second voice responded, male, unfamiliar, speaking in tones too careful to be entirely innocent. Elena hesitated only a moment before continuing on, telling herself that whatever her sister discussed in private was not her concern. But something about the careful, secretive tone of that unfamiliar voice lingered in her mind, long after she had returned to her own chambers. A small, uneasy thread of suspicion she could not quite shake, even as exhaustion finally pulled her towards sleep. She did not yet understand how significant that overheard conversation would prove to be. She only knew, drifting toward uneasy dreams, that the ground beneath her family had shifted in ways that extended far beyond her own uncertain heart. The unfamiliar voice Elena had overheard belonged to a man named Victor, a warrior from the Blackthorn Pack, longtime rivals of Ashwood whose territory bordered theirs to the north. Elena learned this the following day, quite by accident, when she spotted him leaving through the servants' entrance at dawn, his hood pulled low, his manner suggesting a man who wished very much not to be noticed. She said nothing of it at first, uncertain what to make of the encounter, uncertain whether her suspicion was justified, or simply the product of an already stressful week clouding her judgment. But the memory nagged at her throughout the following days, resurfacing each time she caught sight of Celine moving through the castle, with an expression that seemed increasingly calculating, rather than simply hurt. Celine had grown quieter since the ceremony, her usual bright confidence replaced by something colder, more contained. She spoke to Elena only when necessary, brief exchanges devoid of warmth, and Elena found herself grieving the loss of a relationship that had never been particularly close to begin with, yet had still mattered more than she realized until it began slipping away entirely. "She is planning something," Elena said to Rowan one afternoon, as they walked together along the training grounds. She had come to trust him somewhat over the past several days, finding his steady presence and honest counsel a welcome relief from the tension gripping the rest of the castle. "I do not know what, but I saw a Blackthorn warrior leaving her chambers before dawn." Rowan's expression sharpened with concern. "Blackthorn has never been friendly toward Ashwood," he said. "Their alpha, Garrick, has coveted our territory for years, though he has never found sufficient cause to act openly against us." "Would Celine truly work with them?" Elena asked, though even as she spoke the question, she knew the answer was more complicated than a simple yes or no. Celine was hurt, humiliated, desperate to reclaim something she felt had been unjustly stolen from her. People did desperate things under such pressure, things they might never otherwise consider. "I do not know your sister well enough to say," Rowan admitted, "but wounded pride has driven wiser people than her toward dangerous decisions." He paused, considering. "You should tell Cade what you saw." Elena hesitated. "It feels like a betrayal, reporting my own sister on nothing more than suspicion." "It feels worse to remain silent, if your suspicion proves correct," Rowan said gently, "especially if it endangers the pack, or your sister herself, before matters can be resolved peacefully." Elena considered his words carefully, weighing loyalty to her sister against the growing unease building in her chest. She thought of Celine's face during their conversation near the stables, the fury and humiliation barely contained, and she wondered how far that pain might drive her sister if left unaddressed. She found Cade later that evening, in the private study where he often reviewed pack matters, long after most of the castle had retired. He looked up as she entered, something warming in his expression that he quickly schooled back into careful neutrality. "I need to tell you something," Elena said, without preamble. "I saw a Blackthorn warrior leaving Celine's chambers before dawn, several days ago." Cade's expression shifted immediately, concern replacing warmth. "Are you certain of what you saw?" "I am certain of the man's affiliation," Elena said. "I recognize the markings on his cloak. I cannot be certain what business he had with my sister, but the timing, the secrecy, none of it suggests anything innocent." Cade was quiet for a long moment, processing the information with the careful consideration Elena had come to recognize as characteristic of him. "Garrick has long wanted a foothold within Ashwood's borders," he said finally. "If Celine feels wronged by recent events, and Garrick has offered her some manner of alliance or support in exchange for information, you believe she would truly betray her own pack," Elena said, though even as she spoke, doubt crept into her own certainty. "I believe wounded pride can convince people of many things that seem unthinkable in calmer moments," Cade said. "I do not wish to accuse your sister without evidence, but I will have my warriors watch more carefully, and I will speak with the elders about increasing our vigilance along the northern border." Elena nodded, relieved that he had not dismissed her concerns, yet troubled by the confirmation that her instincts had likely been correct. "What happens to her, if this proves true?" "That depends on what she has done, and what she intends to do," Cade said carefully. "I do not wish to see harm come to your family, Elena, but I cannot allow a threat to my pack to go unaddressed, regardless of the relationships involved." Elena understood the weight of what he was saying, understood the impossible position she now found herself in, caught between loyalty to her sister and the safety of the pack she was becoming increasingly entangled with. She left the study that evening, carrying a heavier burden than she had entered with, uncertain whether she had done the right thing, uncertain what consequences her honesty might set into motion. Over the following days, Elena watched her sister more closely than she ever had before, searching for confirmation or denial of her suspicions. Celine remained distant, cold, spending increasing amounts of time away from the main castle, claiming she needed solitude to process recent events. Elena wanted desperately to believe this was true, wanted to believe her sister's absence stemmed from grief rather than scheming. But late one evening, walking near the eastern wall where the castle's defenses were weakest, Elena spotted Celine once again, this time in quiet conversation with a cloaked figure just beyond the boundary markers. She could not hear their words, could not make out the stranger's face clearly in the darkness, but the secretive nature of the meeting confirmed everything her instincts had been warning her about for days. Elena did not approach. She did not want to alert her sister to her presence, did not want to force a confrontation before understanding fully what was happening. Instead, she retreated quietly back toward the castle, her mind racing through the implications of what she had witnessed, understanding now with painful certainty that her sister's resentment had curdled into something far more dangerous than simple hurt feelings. Whatever Celine was planning, Elena understood that it threatened to unravel everything, the fragile peace between their families, the safety of the pack Elena was slowly beginning to feel connected to, and perhaps most painfully, any remaining hope of repairing the relationship between two sisters who had once, despite everything, loved each other deeply. She returned to her chambers that night carrying the weight of an impossible choice, knowing she would need to speak with Kate again soon, knowing that whatever came next would likely change her relationship with her sister forever, in ways that could never fully be undone. The following morning, Elena decided she could not continue watching in silence without at least attempting to reach her sister directly. She found Celine in the garden, sitting alone on a stone bench, her expression distant and troubled in a way that made Elena's chest tighten with old, familiar affection, despite everything that had happened between them. "May I sit?" Elena asked quietly. Celine did not answer immediately, though after a long moment she shifted slightly, leaving room on the bench. Elena took this as permission and sat beside her sister, uncertain how to begin the conversation she knew needed to happen. "I saw you last night," Elena said finally, deciding honesty was the only path forward, by the eastern wall, speaking with someone from Blackthorn. Celine's expression did not change, though something tensed in her shoulders. "You have been spying on me." "I have been worried about you," Elena said. "Ever since the ceremony, you have grown distant, secretive. I saw a Blackthorn warrior leaving your chambers days ago. Now this. I do not know what you are involved in, Celine, but I am afraid it will hurt you far more than it could ever help." "You know nothing of what I am involved in," Celine said sharply, rising from the bench. "You have taken everything that was meant to be mine, and now you wish to control what little remains of my choices as well." "I have taken nothing," Elena said, standing as well, frustration finally breaking through her careful patience. "I did not ask for this bond. I did not seek to humiliate you. But whatever pain you are carrying, Celine, it does not justify endangering our pack, or yourself, by aligning with people who wish us harm." Celine's eyes flashed with something dangerous, something Elena had never seen in her sister before. "You understand nothing about what I am owed," she said, her voice trembling with barely restrained emotion. "I trained my entire life for this role. I sacrificed everything to become worthy of leading beside an alpha. And you, who never wanted any of it, simply had it handed to you because of some feeling neither of you can even properly explain." "I understand that you are hurting," Elena said, softening her voice despite her own frustration. "I understand this feels unjust. But Celine, please, whatever you are planning, it will not undo what has happened. It will only make everything worse." For a moment, something flickered in Celine's expression, something that looked almost like doubt, almost like the sister Elena remembered from childhood, before ambition and rivalry had grown between them. But it vanished quickly, replaced by cold determination. "You do not understand," Celine said quietly. "And I do not expect you to. Just remember, Elena, that whatever happens next, you chose this path when you allowed him to claim you instead of simply refusing." She walked away before Elena could respond, leaving her standing alone in the garden once again, the ache in her chest heavier than before. Elena watched her sister disappear back toward the castle, understanding with painful clarity that whatever conversation might have repaired their relationship had already passed them by, replaced instead by a rift that seemed to widen with every exchange between them. She remained in the garden for a long while afterward, turning her sister's words over in her mind, trying to determine what exactly Celine meant by the ominous warning she had left behind. Whatever plan had been set into motion, Elena understood now that it was already too far along to be stopped through conversation alone. She would need to warn Cade again, more urgently this time, and she would need to prepare herself for whatever consequences followed, regardless of how much it might cost her relationship with the sister she had once, despite every difference between them, loved without question. Elena found herself thinking often, in the days that followed, of the years before any of this had begun, of a childhood spent constantly measured against her twin, always found lacking in whatever quality the moment demanded. She remembered training sessions where instructors praised Celine's strength while gently suggesting Elena focus on quieter pursuits instead. She remembered family gatherings where relatives asked eagerly about Celine's progress while barely acknowledging Elena's presence at all. She had never resented Celine for this. Not truly. It had never been her sister's fault that the world seemed to notice her more easily, that her confidence and charisma drew attention the way flame drew moths. Elena had simply learned, over years of quiet observation, that her own path lay elsewhere, in the background, in the spaces where no one expected anything remarkable of her. She shared some of this history with Cade one evening, as they walked together along the castle walls, the sky above them deepening toward twilight. She had not intended to speak so openly, but something about his patient silence, his willingness to simply listen without offering easy reassurance, drew the words out of her more easily than she expected. "There was a night," she said quietly, "when I was perhaps 12 years old, and our pack hosted a gathering of several neighboring families. Celine performed a display of her fighting skills before the assembled guests, and everyone applauded. Everyone praised her potential as a future leader. I stood at the edge of the hall, and no one asked me to demonstrate anything at all. No one expected me to have anything worth demonstrating." "That must have been painful," Cade said quietly. "It was simply true," Elena said. "I had accepted it by then. I understood my place was different from hers, and I told myself that was simply how things were meant to be." She paused, watching the last light of sunset fade over the distant hills. It was easier to accept than to keep hoping for something that clearly was not going to happen. Cade was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I understand something of what you describe," he said finally, "though my circumstances were different. My brother, Aldrich, was meant to lead this pack. He was strong, confident, exactly what everyone expected an alpha to be. I spent years believing myself destined for a lesser role, content to serve beside him rather than lead in my own right." "What changed?" Elena asked. Cade's expression grew somber. "He died," he said simply, "an illness that took him swiftly, before anyone fully understood how serious it had become. I became alpha not because I was chosen for my strength or ambition, but because there was no one else left to carry the responsibility." Elena had not expected this, had not realized the weight Cade carried beneath his confident exterior. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "It was many years ago," Cade said. "But I remember, vividly, what it felt like to believe myself secondary, useful only for the roles no one else wanted. When I recognized that same feeling in you, standing in that hall during the ceremony, something in me could not simply ignore it, regardless of the complications it created." Elena considered this, understanding now more clearly why his recognition of her pain had felt so immediate, so genuine, rather than the calculated observation she had initially suspected. Shared experience, it seemed, created understanding that words alone could rarely accomplish. "I do not want you to feel obligated to prove yourself worthy of this bond," Cade continued. "You are not required to become someone you are not, simply to justify the choice my wolf made, without consulting either of us first. Whatever role you choose to take beside me, it should reflect who you already are, not who you believe you must become." The words settled warmly in Elena's chest, easing some of the anxiety that had built steadily since the ceremony, the fear that she would need to transform herself entirely into someone resembling Celine in order to fulfill whatever expectations came with standing beside an alpha king. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for understanding that." They continued walking in comfortable silence for a while longer, the tension between them easing gradually into something that felt, for the first time, genuinely peaceful. Elena found herself, despite every lingering doubt, beginning to trust the sincerity behind Cade's patience, beginning to believe that whatever bond existed between them might indeed prove real, given enough time to grow naturally, rather than being forced by circumstance or obligation. Yet even as this fragile trust began taking root, she could not fully shake the unease building beneath it, the knowledge that Celine's warning still hung unresolved, that whatever her sister had set into motion continued moving forward beyond Elena's ability to stop it, through conversation or concern alone. She wondered, watching the last colors of sunset fade completely from the sky, how much longer the fragile peace surrounding them would last, before Celine's choices forced a reckoning none of them could avoid. Later that same week, Elena's mother sought her out, finding her in the small garden that had become something of a refuge over the past several days. Her mother settled onto the bench beside her without invitation, and for a while, neither of them spoke, simply sitting together beneath the wide oak tree, as afternoon light filtered through the leaves above. "I owe you an apology," her mother said finally, breaking the silence. "For many years of quietly allowing your sister's needs to overshadow your own." Elena turned, surprised by the admission. "You do not need to apologize for anything. Celine needed guidance to become the leader everyone expected her to be." "That is not entirely true," her mother said, shaking her head slowly. "It was easier, in truth, to focus attention where it was most visibly rewarded. Celine's confidence, her charisma, these qualities made her easy to champion. Your quietness, your careful thoughtfulness, these were qualities I failed to properly value, simply because they did not announce themselves as loudly." "I never resented you for that," Elena said, though even as she spoke, she recognized the small kernel of old hurt still lodged somewhere beneath her words. "Perhaps you should have," her mother said gently. "I have watched you these past days, watched the careful way you consider every decision, the honesty with which you have approached an impossibly complicated situation. These are the qualities of a true leader, Elena, perhaps more so than the confidence your sister has always displayed so readily." Elena felt tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, surprised by how deeply her mother's words affected her. How many years of quiet longing for exactly this kind of acknowledgement came rushing to the surface all at once. "I do not know if I am ready for any of this," Elena admitted softly. "The bond, the responsibility, everything that comes with standing beside an alpha. No one ever feels entirely ready for such things," her mother said. "Your sister spent years training for a role she believed certain to be hers, and yet even she struggles now with uncertainty and fear beneath her anger. Readiness is not truly a requirement for growth, Elena, only willingness." They sat together for a while longer, her mother's presence offering a comfort Elena had not realized she desperately needed. When her mother finally rose to leave, she paused, turning back with her expression Elena had rarely seen directed toward her before, warm, and entirely without reservation. "Whatever you decide," her mother said, "know that I am proud of the woman you have become, regardless of whether that woman ever stands beside an alpha king or chooses an entirely different path altogether." Elena watched her mother walk away, the words settling deep in her chest, easing wounds she had carried silently for years, without ever fully acknowledging their weight. She remained in the garden long afterward, processing this unexpected shift in her relationship with her mother, understanding that perhaps the upheaval of recent days had opened space not only for new pain, but for old wounds finally beginning to heal as well. As evening approached, Elena made her way back toward the main castle, her mind considerably lighter than it had been in days. She passed through the main hall, nodding politely to servants preparing the evening meal, when a commotion near the front entrance caught her attention. A messenger stood breathless before several pack elders, his expression urgent, his clothing dusty from what appeared to have been a long, hurried journey. Elena slowed her steps, catching fragments of the conversation as she approached. "Blackthorn scouts," the messenger was saying, "spotted along the northern border, moving in numbers larger than any routine patrol would require." Elena's chest tightened immediately, understanding with sudden clarity that whatever Celine had set into motion was no longer a distant, theoretical threat. It was arriving now, faster than any of them had anticipated, and the fragile peace she had begun to build over the past several days suddenly felt impossibly fragile against the danger gathering just beyond their borders. She turned and hurried toward Cade's study, understanding that whatever came next would require every ounce of courage and clarity she could gather, and that the old wounds she had only just begun healing would need to wait for a more peaceful moment to fully mend. Cade was already gathering his warriors when Elena arrived at the study, Maps spread across the wide table. Rowan and several other senior fighters clustered around him, discussing positions and defenses in low, urgent tones. Cade looked up as she entered, his expression sharpening with concern. "You should not be here," he said, though not unkindly. "This will not be a safe place tonight." "I saw Celine meeting with Blackthorn," Elena said, ignoring his concern entirely. "I told you already. Whatever is happening now, I believe she is involved." Cade's jaw tightened, though he did not look surprised by the confirmation. "Garrick has been testing our borders for years, searching for weakness. If your sister has provided him information about our defenses, our numbers, our vulnerabilities, this could prove far more dangerous than a simple border dispute." "What can I do?" Elena asked. "Stay within the castle walls," Cade said firmly. "This is not a battle you are trained for, and I will not risk your safety needlessly." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could contribute somehow, but she recognized the wisdom in his caution, understanding that her presence on any battlefield would likely become a liability rather than an asset. She nodded reluctantly, though frustration simmered beneath her acceptance. Over the following hours, the castle transformed around her. Warriors donning armor, weapons distributed, defensive positions established along every vulnerable point in the outer walls. Elena watched from a high window as Cade organized his forces with calm, methodical precision, his earlier warmth replaced by the focused intensity of a leader preparing to protect everything under his care. Night fell heavy and tense over the castle, torches burning along the walls, warriors stationed at careful intervals, watching the darkness beyond for any sign of approaching threat. Elena remained awake despite Cade's suggestion that she rest, too anxious to consider sleep while danger gathered somewhere beyond their borders. Near midnight, the first alarm sounded. Elena rushed to her window in time to see torchlight moving rapidly along the northern approach, shadows shifting between the trees that bordered Ashwood's territory. Shouts echoed across the courtyard below as warriors scrambled to their positions, and Elena's heart pounded painfully against her ribs as she watched the chaos unfold. She could not simply remain in her chambers, waiting helplessly while others faced danger below. She made her way quickly through the castle corridors, ignoring the instructions to stay confined, driven by an instinct she could not fully explain, a need to be closer to whatever was unfolding rather than isolated and useless within safe walls. She found Rowan near the main entrance, directing a group of younger warriors toward defensive positions along the eastern approach. He turned, startled to see her. "You should not be here," he said, echoing Cade's earlier warning. "I cannot simply hide while everyone else fights," Elena said. "Tell me what I can do." Rowan studied her for a moment, clearly weighing the risk against her evident determination. "The healers will need help," he said finally. "If you insist on remaining nearby, make yourself useful there, tending to the wounded as they are brought back." Elena nodded immediately, grateful for any role that allowed her to contribute rather than remain helplessly idle. She made her way toward the healing hall, where several experienced healers were already preparing supplies, anticipating the injuries that would inevitably follow whatever battle unfolded beyond the walls. The following hours passed in a blur of urgent activity. Wounded warriors carried in with increasing frequency, their injuries ranging from minor cuts to far more serious wounds that required the healer's full attention and skill. Elena worked alongside them, fetching supplies, applying bandages under careful instruction, offering water and quiet reassurance to warriors whose pain made speech difficult. Through the chaos, she caught fragments of information from those brought in, enough to understand that the Blackthorn forces had launched a coordinated assault along multiple points of the northern border, clearly informed about weaknesses that should have remained secret. Whatever information Celine had provided, it had given their enemies a significant advantage, one that Cade's warriors were struggling to overcome, despite their skill and determination. Near dawn, as exhaustion began weighing heavily on everyone within the healing hall, a warrior stumbled through the entrance, blood streaking his face, urgency in his expression, despite his obvious pain. "The Alpha," he gasped, searching the room desperately. "Where is Alpha Cade? We need him at the eastern flank immediately. Blackthorn forces are pushing through faster than expected." Elena's chest tightened with fear, though she forced herself to remain focused, directing the warrior toward a healer, while her mind raced through the implications of what she had just heard. If the eastern flank was truly failing, if Cade himself was needed there directly, The situation had grown far more dangerous than anyone had initially anticipated. She thought immediately of Celine, wondering whether her sister understood the true cost of whatever alliance she had formed, wondering whether Celine had ever intended for the conflict to escalate this seriously, or whether she too had underestimated the consequences of her wounded pride and desperate desire for revenge. Whatever the answer, Elena understood that the battle unfolding beyond the castle walls would determine far more than simple territorial boundaries. It would determine the fate of everyone she had come to care about over these past turbulent days, and quite possibly, the fate of the fragile, uncertain bond that had begun forming between herself and the Alpha King she was only just beginning to trust completely. Word came shortly after that Cade had rushed toward the eastern flank himself, taking a contingent of his strongest warriors with him, leaving the healing hall and the western defenses thinner than anyone would have preferred. Elena continued working through the exhaustion pulling at her limbs, though her mind remained sharply focused on the reports filtering in from the battle beyond the walls. It was during a brief lull, as she carried fresh water toward a group of recovering warriors, that she noticed something troubling through the western window. A small group of figures moved through the shadows near the outer wall, too organized to be stragglers from the main battle, too quiet to be anything other than deliberate. She set down the water immediately and moved closer to the window, watching carefully. The figures carried no torches, moving instead by what little moonlight filtered through the clouds above, and Elena's stomach twisted with sudden understanding. This was not a random skirmish. This was a second force, positioned deliberately, to strike where the castle's defenses had been weakened by the eastern assault. She rushed to find the nearest warrior, a young fighter named Callum, who had been left behind due to an injured shoulder sustained earlier in the night. "There are enemies approaching from the western wall," she said urgently. "I saw them just now, moving through the shadows." Callum's expression sharpened immediately despite his pain. "Are you certain?" "Completely certain," Elena said. "They are avoiding the main gate entirely, moving toward the section near the old storage buildings where the wall is lowest." Callum did not hesitate, calling out to the few remaining warriors stationed nearby, redirecting their attention toward the threat Elena had identified. Word spread quickly, and within minutes, a small but determined group had repositioned themselves to intercept the approaching force before they could breach the castle's weakened defenses. Elena watched from a safe distance as the confrontation unfolded, the element of surprise working powerfully in their favor. The Blackthorn scouts, clearly expecting an unguarded approach, found themselves instead met with organized resistance, and within a short, tense battle, the threat was neutralized entirely, several enemies captured, others retreating back into the darkness beyond the walls. Callum approached her afterward, his expression a mixture of relief and genuine respect. "Your warning likely prevented a serious breach," he said. "If they had reached the storage buildings unnoticed, they could have opened the gates from within, allowing the larger force direct access to the castle itself." Elena felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest, something she had rarely experienced in her life. The simple, powerful satisfaction of having contributed something genuinely valuable, something that mattered. For years, she had believed herself unsuited for anything beyond quiet, background roles. Tonight, her careful observation, the very quality that had always seemed to overshadow her, had proven crucial in protecting the pack. She returned to the healing hall as dawn began breaking over the horizon, exhaustion and adrenaline mixing strangely in her chest, and continued her work among the wounded, until word finally arrived that the main assault had been repelled, Blackthorn forces retreating back toward their own territory after suffering losses too significant to sustain a prolonged assault. Cade returned shortly after sunrise, exhaustion evident in every line of his body, though relief eased the tension from his expression when he found Elena still working among the healers, safe and unharmed, despite the danger of the night. He crossed the room immediately, something urgent and unguarded in his expression that Elena had not seen from him before. "I heard what you did," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion, "and something else, something warmer. Callum told me you spotted the western assault before anyone else noticed." "I only saw movement in the shadows," Elena said, suddenly self-conscious beneath his intense gaze. "Anyone paying attention might have noticed the same thing." "No," Cade said firmly. "Anyone might have looked in that direction and seen nothing significant at all. You noticed because you have spent your entire life learning to observe carefully, to notice details others overlook. Tonight, That skill likely saved this castle from a devastating breach. Elena did not know how to respond to such direct, unwavering praise, so unfamiliar after years of standing quietly in her sister's shadow. She simply nodded, allowing herself, for the first time, to fully accept that her quiet strength had proven every bit as valuable as her sister's bold confidence, perhaps even more so in circumstances that required careful attention rather than dramatic display. As the castle slowly began recovering from the night's chaos, tending wounds both physical and otherwise, Elena understood that whatever remained unresolved between herself and Celine, whatever consequences awaited her sister for the role she had played in the night's violence, the battle had changed something fundamental within Elena herself. She was no longer simply the overlooked twin, valuable only in comparison to her sister's brighter qualities. She had proven, to herself as much as to anyone else, that she possessed strength entirely her own. In the days following the attack, the castle settled into a fragile, watchful calm, warriors tending to their injuries, while scouts maintained heightened vigilance along every border. Elena found herself spending increasing amounts of time near Cade, initially drawn by practical necessity as they coordinated the aftermath of the battle, but gradually, she recognized that her presence beside him had begun to feel less like obligation and more like something she genuinely sought out. They walked together one evening along the eastern wall, the same path they had taken before the attack, though the atmosphere between them now carried a different quality entirely, softer, more comfortable, built on the shared experience of danger survived together. "You have not asked me what will happen to Celine," Cade said quietly, breaking a comfortable silence that had stretched between them for several minutes. Elena's chest tightened at the mention of her sister. "I have been afraid to ask," she admitted. "Afraid of what the answer might be. She has confessed to providing information to Garrick," Cade said carefully. "Not out of malice, toward the pack itself, she claims, but out of desperation, to prove herself capable of something significant after losing what she believed was rightfully hers." "Will she be punished severely?" Elena asked, dreading the answer. "The elders have called for exile," Cade said. "Given the severity of the attack, given the losses we sustained, many believe leniency would set a dangerous precedent." He paused, watching Elena's expression carefully. "I have not yet made a final decision." "What are you considering instead?" Elena asked, hope flickering, despite her uncertainty. "A period of restricted confinement, perhaps," Cade said. "Supervised service to the pack she betrayed, an opportunity to prove genuine remorse rather than simply facing exile and disappearing from all consequence entirely. But this decision affects you directly, Elena. I did not wish to decide without understanding your feelings first." Elena considered this carefully, torn between the anger she still carried toward her sister's reckless betrayal and the old, persistent love she could not simply extinguish, despite everything that had happened. "I do not wish to see her exiled," she said finally. "Whatever she has done, however badly she has behaved, she remains my sister. But I understand if the pack requires a severe consequence to maintain trust and safety." "I will consider your feelings carefully," Cade said, "though I will not promise an outcome that compromises the pack's safety, regardless of family loyalty." "I would not ask you to," Elena said. "I only hope some path exists that allows genuine consequence without destroying any possibility of redemption entirely." Cade nodded slowly, something like respect deepening in his expression. "That is remarkably generous, given what her actions nearly cost this pack, and nearly cost you as well." Elena considered this, surprised to realize how genuinely she meant her own words. "I understand pain driving someone toward poor decisions," she said. "I do not excuse what she did, but I do not believe punishment without any hope of redemption serves anyone well, including the pack itself." They continued walking in thoughtful silence, the conversation settling something between them that had remained unspoken until now, a mutual respect built not simply on the strange, undeniable pull of their bond, but on genuine understanding of each other's character, values, and capacity for both strength and compassion. "I have been thinking," Cade said eventually, his tone shifting toward something more tentative than his usual confident bearing, "about what you said, when we first spoke honestly with each other, about needing time, before deciding whether this bond was something you wished to pursue." Elena's pulse quickened slightly. "What about it?" "I do not wish to pressure you," Cade said carefully, But I find myself increasingly certain, with each day that passes, that whatever hesitation remained in my own heart has entirely disappeared. I understand you may still need time. I only wanted you to know where I stand, honestly and completely. Elena stopped walking, turning to face him directly, searching his expression in the fading evening light. She thought of everything that had happened over the past several days, the doubt, the danger, the surprising warmth of feeling genuinely valued for the first time in her life. She thought of the strange, undeniable pull she felt whenever she stood close to him, a pull that had only grown stronger, rather than fading with time and familiarity. I do not think I need as much time as I originally believed, she said quietly. Something shifted in Cade's expression, hope and restrained emotion mixing together as he studied her carefully, searching for confirmation of what he hoped her words might mean. What are you saying, Elena? I am saying, Elena said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest, that I believe I am beginning to feel what you described feeling, that first night. Something I cannot fully explain, but something that feels increasingly undeniable the longer I allow myself to acknowledge it. Cade reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished, and gently took her hand in his. The contact sent warmth spreading through her chest, familiar now after days of careful, patient companionship, yet still carrying an undeniable spark that confirmed everything her heart had been slowly, cautiously accepting. I am not asking for a complete answer tonight, Cade said softly. But know that whatever pace you need, however long this takes to fully develop into whatever it is meant to become, I intend to remain patient and genuine for as long as it takes. Elena smiled, something warm and unguarded, an expression she had rarely allowed herself in the presence of anyone beyond her closest family. Thank you, she said, for understanding that trust cannot simply be commanded into existence, regardless of how strongly a bond might pull two people together. They remained together on the wall as darkness fully settled over the castle grounds, hands still joined, conversation flowing more easily between them than it ever had before. Whatever challenges remained, whatever consequences awaited Celine, whatever uncertainty lingered about the future of the alliance between their packs, Elena understood that the bond growing between herself and Cade had become something she could no longer deny or dismiss. It had become something she genuinely wanted to explore fully, regardless of where that exploration might eventually lead. The fragile peace that had settled over the castle shattered less than a week later, when Celine, still confined to her chambers pending the elders' final decision, managed to slip past her guards during a moment of distraction and disappear into the surrounding forest entirely. Elena learned of her sister's escape from her mother, who arrived at her chambers early one morning, face pale, with a mixture of fear and exhaustion that suggested she had not slept at all since discovering the news. She is gone, her mother said without preamble, her voice trembling. Sometime during the night, the guards found her chambers empty this morning, no sign of struggle, no indication of how she managed to leave undetected. Elena's stomach dropped immediately, dread pooling cold and heavy in her chest. Where would she go? I do not know, her mother admitted. But given her previous alliance with Blackthorn, I fear the answer is obvious. Cade arrived shortly after, his expression grim, confirming what Elena already suspected. Scouts spotted movement near the northern border overnight, he said. It appears Celine made contact with Blackthorn forces before disappearing entirely. We believe she has taken refuge with Garrick directly. Why would she do this now? Elena asked, though even as she spoke, understanding began forming painfully in her mind. The elders had not yet decided her punishment. She might have faced something far less severe than exile. Perhaps she did not trust that leniency would prevail, Cade said. Or perhaps Garrick offered her something she found more appealing than facing consequence within our pack at all. Elena felt sick with the implications, understanding that her sister's desperate flight likely meant deeper involvement with Blackthorn than any of them had previously realized. Whatever alliance Celine had formed, it appeared to run deeper than simple information exchange born from wounded pride. Over the following days, reports filtered in, confirming their worst fears. Celine had not merely fled to Blackthorn territory seeking refuge. She had allied herself fully with Garrick, providing him with detailed knowledge of Ashwood's defenses, its warriors, its vulnerabilities, information that would prove devastating if Garrick chose to launch a more coordinated, comprehensive assault, than the failed attempt weeks earlier. Elena struggled to reconcile this deepening betrayal with the sister she remembered from childhood, the girl who had once shared secrets and laughter with her, beneath the same oak tree, where Elena now sought quiet solitude. Whatever pain and desperation had driven Celine toward this path, Elena found it increasingly difficult to excuse choices that now clearly endangered not just abstract political alliances, but real lives, real people she had come to care about deeply. The confirmation of Celine's full betrayal arrived roughly 2 weeks after her initial disappearance, when scouts intercepted a messenger carrying detailed maps of Ashwood's defensive positions, maps that could only have been drawn by someone with intimate knowledge of the castle's layout and vulnerabilities. Cade called an emergency council immediately, gathering elders and senior warriors to discuss the mounting threat. Elena attended as well, though she remained largely silent, listening as reports were shared, strategies debated, the gravity of the situation settling heavily over everyone present. Garrick intends a full assault, one of the senior warriors reported grimly. Likely within the coming days, given the detailed nature of the information he now possesses. We must prepare for something far more coordinated than the previous attempt. What of Celine? Elena asked quietly, unable to remain entirely silent despite her discomfort speaking before the assembled council. She remains with Garrick's forces, the warrior confirmed. Whether by choice or by circumstance, we cannot be certain. But she has clearly committed herself fully to this alliance, regardless of the consequences it brings upon her own family and pack. Elena absorbed this information heavily, understanding that whatever hope remained for her sister's redemption had grown increasingly distant with each passing day of deepening betrayal. She thought of her mother's grief, her father's careful, controlled anguish, and her own complicated mixture of anger, sorrow, and lingering, stubborn love that refused to entirely disappear despite everything Celine had done. As the council continued discussing defensive preparations, Elena found herself increasingly determined to contribute meaningfully to whatever came next, rather than remaining passively on the sidelines as she had during the previous attack. She had proven, weeks earlier, that her careful observation and quiet strength carried genuine value. She intended to offer that value again, regardless of the danger, regardless of how directly this coming conflict involved her own family. That evening, as preparations continued throughout the castle, Elena sought out Cade privately, finding him reviewing maps and strategic reports in his study, exhaustion evident in the tension lining his shoulders. "I want to help," she said firmly, without preamble. "Not simply tending wounded warriors after the fact, but contributing to whatever strategy you develop beforehand." Cade looked up, studying her carefully. "This assault will likely be far more dangerous than the previous attempt," he said. "Garrick now possesses detailed knowledge of our defenses. Whatever role you take, the risk will be significant." "I understand the risk," Elena said, "but I also understand my sister, understand the way she thinks, the weaknesses she might have emphasized to Garrick, the strategies she might have suggested based on her own training and knowledge of our defenses. I can offer insight no one else possesses." Cade considered this for a long moment, weighing the value of her insight against the danger of involving her more directly in the coming conflict. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Your insight could prove invaluable," he admitted, "but I will not risk your safety carelessly, regardless of how valuable your contribution might be." "I would not ask you to," Elena said, "but please, allow me to help however I safely can. I cannot simply wait helplessly, while my sister's choices threaten everything we have built here." Cade studied her for a long moment, something like fierce protectiveness mixing with genuine respect in his expression. "Together then," he said finally. "We will face whatever comes next together." Elena nodded, steadying herself against the fear building in her chest, understanding that the coming days would test everything she had learned about herself over these past turbulent weeks, her courage, her strength, and the fragile, growing bond that had transformed her from an overlooked twin into someone whose contributions genuinely mattered to the pack she had come to consider her own. The assault came 3 days later, under cover of a heavy autumn storm that Garrick clearly believed would provide additional advantage for his forces. Elena stood beside Cade in the war room as reports arrived confirming the approach, rain hammering against the windows, thunder rolling ominously in the distance. "They are moving faster than anticipated," Rowan reported, arriving breathless from the outer watch. Garrick has committed his full strength to this assault. This is not a testing action. This is meant to end the conflict entirely. Elena's mind raced through everything she knew of Celine's training, the strategies she had learned, the vulnerabilities she might have identified during years of preparation for a leadership role she ultimately never claimed. The southern approach, she said suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. Celine always considered our southern defenses the weakest point, the terrain there, making organized defense more difficult than anywhere else along our borders. Cade studied the map spread before them, following Elena's reasoning carefully. If Garrick intends his primary assault there, while creating diversions elsewhere, then reinforcing the southern approach now, before the diversions draw our attention away, could prevent the breach entirely, Elena finished. Cade nodded, quickly redirecting his forces based on this insight, strengthening the southern defenses while maintaining sufficient coverage elsewhere to address whatever diversionary tactics Garrick might employ. Elena watched as warriors repositioned throughout the castle grounds, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. The battle, when it finally arrived, unfolded largely as Elena had predicted. Diversionary assaults struck along the northern and eastern approaches, drawing initial attention, while the true weight of Garrick's forces pressed hard against the southern defenses, exactly where Elena's insight had prompted Cade to strengthen their position beforehand. The fighting was fierce, the storm making visibility difficult and footing treacherous, but the reinforced southern defense held, Blackthorn forces meeting far stronger resistance than Garrick had clearly anticipated, based on whatever outdated information Celine had originally provided, before circumstances shifted the balance of power. Elena remained near the healing hall throughout the battle, tending wounded warriors as they were carried in, her earlier insight having already contributed significantly to the defense before the fighting even began. Near the height of the conflict, as thunder crashed overhead and rain continued pounding against the castle walls, a warrior stumbled through the entrance carrying urgent news. Alpha Cade has engaged Garrick directly, the warrior reported, his voice strained with exhaustion and concern. Near the southern gate, the fighting there has grown extremely dangerous. Elena's chest seized with fear, understanding immediately the danger Cade now faced, confronting the enemy Alpha directly amid the chaos of battle. Without fully considering the wisdom of her actions, she found herself moving toward the southern gate, driven by an instinct she could not ignore, a need to be near him, regardless of the danger involved. She arrived to find the battle at its most intense, warriors clashing fiercely amid rain and mud, and through the chaos, she spotted Cade locked in combat, with a warrior whose bearing suggested authority, presumably Garrick himself. The fight was brutal but controlled, both combatants clearly skilled, though Elena could see exhaustion beginning to weigh on Cade after hours of coordinating the broader defense before engaging directly himself. Elena searched desperately for some way to help, understanding she possessed no combat training capable of directly assisting in such a confrontation. Her eyes fell instead on a section of the wall where several Blackthorn warriors were attempting to breach a weakened point. Warriors that the main defensive force had not yet noticed amid the chaos surrounding Cade's direct confrontation. She called out immediately, alerting nearby warriors to the breach attempt, her voice carrying clearly, despite the storm and chaos surrounding them. Her warning arrived just in time, warriors repositioning quickly enough to prevent the breach, the additional pressure this created ultimately forcing Garrick's remaining forces into a difficult position, caught between failed diversions and a main assault that had not achieved its intended breakthrough. Moments later, Elena watched as Cade finally overcame Garrick, the enemy Alpha yielding, rather than continuing a fight he could no longer sustain, given the collapse of his broader assault. The remaining Blackthorn forces, seeing their leader defeated, began retreating rapidly, back toward their own territory, the battle ending in decisive victory for Ashwood, despite the significant danger it had posed. In the aftermath, as warriors began the exhausting process of tending wounds and securing the battlefield, Elena searched frantically through the chaos until she finally spotted Cade, exhausted but alive, being helped toward the healing hall by Rowan and several other warriors. She rushed toward him, relief flooding through her chest, so powerfully it nearly brought her to tears. "You are safe," she said, reaching for him carefully, mindful of visible injuries along his side. "Thanks to your warning about the breach," Cade said, exhaustion evident in his voice, though warmth remained clear in his expression. "And your insight about the southern defenses, before the battle even began. Elena. Your contributions today likely saved this castle from a devastating defeat. Elena helped guide him toward the healing hall, her mind still processing everything that had happened. The danger survived, the battle won, and beneath it all, a growing certainty that whatever bond existed between herself and Cade had been tested thoroughly by the chaos of the past weeks, and had emerged stronger rather than weakened by the trials they had faced together. As healers tended to Cade's injuries, Elena remained close beside him, understanding fully now that whatever uncertainty had once clouded her feelings about this unexpected bond had entirely dissolved, replaced by a clear, unwavering certainty about what she wanted her future to hold. Word arrived later that evening that Celine had been captured amid the retreating Blackthorn forces, her fate now uncertain, but no longer immediately dangerous to the pack she had briefly betrayed. Elena felt a complicated mixture of relief and sorrow at this news, understanding that whatever consequences awaited her sister, at least the immediate danger had passed, and perhaps some path toward eventual reconciliation might still remain possible, however distant that possibility currently seemed. For now, though, sitting beside Cade as healers finished tending his wounds, Elena allowed herself simply to feel grateful for his safety, grateful for the strength she had discovered within herself throughout these turbulent weeks, and grateful for the bond that had grown between them, despite every obstacle that circumstance and family betrayal had placed in their path. "I choose this," she said quietly, meeting his tired but attentive gaze. "Not because a bond compels me, not because circumstance has left me little alternative, but because I have watched you these past weeks, and I have come to trust completely that what exists between us is genuine." Cade reached for her hand, holding it gently despite his exhaustion. "Then we choose each other," he said softly, "completely and without reservation." Celine's fate was decided several weeks later, once the immediate aftermath of the battle had settled, and the elders convened to consider the full weight of her betrayal, alongside the mitigating circumstances that had driven her toward such desperate choices. Elena attended the proceedings, standing quietly beside her parents as the council deliberated. In the end, exile was set aside in favor of a lengthy period of restricted service, Celine required to prove her loyalty through years of supervised contribution to the pack she had betrayed, stripped of the leadership prospects she had once trained so intensely to claim, yet given the opportunity to eventually earn back a measure of trust through demonstrated commitment rather than empty words alone. Elena visited her sister shortly after the decision was announced, finding Celine in the modest quarters now assigned to her, far removed from the grand chambers she had once occupied as the presumed future mate of an Alpha King. Celine looked up as Elena entered, her expression guarded, though something in her posture suggested exhaustion had worn away much of the sharp anger that had defined their previous encounters. "I did not expect you to come," Celine said quietly. "I did not expect to come either," Elena admitted, settling into the single chair available in the sparse room. "But I could not simply move forward without at least attempting to understand where things went so wrong between us." Celine was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I was so certain I deserved everything I had trained for," she said finally, her voice smaller than Elena had ever heard it. "When it was taken from me so suddenly, I could not bear the humiliation. Garrick offered me a path toward reclaiming some measure of the power and respect I felt I had lost, and I was too consumed by anger and hurt pride to recognize how badly that path would end. You endangered everyone," Elena said, though gently rather than accusingly. "Not just the pack, but yourself as well." "I know," Celine said, tears finally gathering in her eyes. "I have had considerable time to understand the true weight of what I nearly caused. I am sorry, Elena, not simply because I was caught, but because I allowed my own pain to blind me to the harm my choices would bring to people who never deserved to suffer for my wounded pride." Elena reached out, taking her sister's hand, an old, familiar gesture from childhood that neither of them had shared in years. "I forgive you," she said quietly. "It will take time to fully trust you again, time for you to rebuild what your choices damaged. But I do not wish to lose my sister entirely over this, regardless of how painful these past weeks have been." Celine looked up, surprise and cautious hope mixing in her expression. "You would still consider me your sister, after everything?" "You will always be my sister," Elena said simply. "That has never changed, regardless of how badly circumstances between us have unfolded. I hope, Given time, we might rebuild something resembling the relationship we once shared, before rivalry and expectation drove us apart. They spoke for a while longer, tentative and careful, old wounds acknowledged rather than fully healed, but a foundation established for whatever slow reconciliation might follow in the months and years ahead. Elena left the meeting with a lighter heart than she had carried in weeks, understanding that whatever the future held, the possibility of eventually repairing her relationship with her sister remained genuinely open, rather than permanently foreclosed by anger and unresolved hurt. The formal bonding ceremony between Elena and Cade took place several months later, once the pack had fully recovered from the conflict with Blackthorn, and the fragile peace along their borders had solidified into something more stable and secure. The Great Hall, the same space where Elena had once stood humiliated while her sister was chosen instead, now blazed with warmth and celebration, entirely different from that difficult night months earlier. Elena stood at the center of the gathered pack, dressed in ceremonial robes that caught the torchlight beautifully, feeling none of the anxious dread that had gripped her during the previous ceremony. Instead, she felt only quiet, steady confidence, surrounded by people who had come to genuinely respect the contributions she had made during the darkest days of the conflict with Blackthorn. Her parents stood nearby, pride evident in their expressions, and even Celine, granted permission to attend under careful supervision, watched from the edges of the gathering, her expression solemn but genuinely warm, a far cry from the fury and resentment that had once defined her reaction to this same circumstance. Cade approached, dressed formally, his expression carrying none of the careful, guarded composure he had shown during that first difficult morning when he had reversed his initial choice before the entire pack. Instead, warmth and certainty radiated from him openly, visible to everyone gathered in the hall. "Elena of the Hartwell line," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, echoing words spoken months earlier under vastly different circumstances. "I choose you. Not out of duty, not out of the demands of a bond I once tried to resist, but because I have come to know you fully, and I could imagine no future without you standing beside me." Elena felt tears gathering, though they were tears of genuine joy, rather than the confusion and fear that had marked her reaction to similar words months earlier. "I choose you as well," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I have watched you lead with fairness and compassion, even toward those who betrayed you. I have felt your patience, your genuine care, and I know now, without any remaining doubt, that this bond between us is exactly what it was always meant to be." The ceremony concluded with the traditional exchange of vows and the ceremonial mark that would bind them formally as mates before the entire pack, and as the hall erupted into celebration around them, Elena felt something settle deeply and permanently within her chest, a sense of belonging she had never fully experienced during all her years living quietly in her sister's shadow. In the months that followed, Elena grew steadily into her role beside Cade, contributing her careful observation and quiet wisdom to pack matters in ways that complemented his bold leadership perfectly. She established herself not as a replacement for the confident, charismatic leader everyone had once expected Celine to become, but as something entirely her own, valued precisely for the qualities that had once seemed to overshadow her. Celine, true to her word, worked diligently through her period of restricted service, slowly rebuilding trust through consistent, genuine effort rather than empty promises. The relationship between the sisters remained complicated, marked by the scars of betrayal and old rivalry, yet it grew steadily warmer as months passed, old wounds gradually beginning to heal through patient, deliberate effort on both sides. Elena often found herself, in quiet moments, reflecting on the strange, unexpected path that had brought her to this place, from the humiliation of standing overlooked while her sister was chosen, through doubt and danger, and the slow, careful building of genuine trust, to finally standing here, beside a man who had recognized something in her worth choosing, worth fighting for, worth loving completely. She understood now, in ways she never had during those quiet, overlooked years of her childhood, that being chosen for love, rather than convenience or obligation, carried a weight and a joy that no amount of status or attention could ever have replaced. She had spent years believing herself unworthy of being seen, of being valued for exactly who she was, rather than who others expected her to become. Standing now as the true mate of the Alpha King, respected by warriors and elders alike for the courage and wisdom she had shown during the darkest days of conflict, Elena finally understood the truth she had struggled so long to believe. She had never truly been the overlooked twin, destined always to stand quietly in someone else's shadow. She had simply been waiting for someone capable of recognizing the strength that had been within her all along, and in Cade, she had finally found exactly that. Their bond, forged not through the convenience of a single ceremony, but through weeks of doubt, danger, and gradually deepening trust, stood now as an example to the entire pack of what a true mate bond represented. Not the simple assignment of titles and treaties, but the genuine recognition of two people whose strengths complemented each other perfectly, whose love had been tested by fire, and had emerged only stronger for the trial. And as Elena looked out over the celebrating pack that evening, her hand held securely in Cade's, she felt, for the first time in her entire life, completely and genuinely at peace with exactly who she was, and exactly where she belonged.